Picture the smoke and ash just settling over a totally ruined city. The roaring flames of Troy reflecting in the dark waters of the Aegean Sea. You know, for 10 grueling, blood-soaked years, the absolute greatest warriors of the ancient world had thrown themselves against those high, impenetrable walls. But raw muscle? That didn't win the Trojan War. No, it was won by the brilliant, deceptive mind of the Greek king Odysseus. It was his legendary intellect that engineered the famous Trojan horse, bypassing those unbreachable gates and bringing a total, devastating victory to the Greek alliance. So, with the mighty city basically burned to ash, Odysseus gathers his men and his fleet of 12 ships to finally begin the voyage home. He's looking out over the horizon, expecting a swift, triumphant return to his island kingdom of Ithaca. Waiting for him are his loyal wife Penelope and a son, Telemachus, who he honestly hasn't seen since the boy was an infant. But as we'll see, victory often breeds a really dangerous poison. Amidst all the celebration and the spoils of war, a dark arrogance had taken root in the hearts of the victorious Greeks. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are embarking on a cinematic journey through one of the greatest, honestly darkest stories ever told. This isn't just some tale of a long boat ride home. It is a brutal, 20-year epic filled with terrifying monsters, divine wrath, fatal hubris, and ultimately a chilling, bloody vengeance. Let's dive in. Part 1. The Arrogant Victor, Desecration, and the Cyclops. Now, looking at the very start of this horrific journey, we really have to understand the grave mistake the Greeks made. During the chaotic, violent sack of Troy, the victorious warriors literally desecrated the sacred temples of the gods. And this awakened the wrath of Poseidon, the mighty god of the oceans, effectively turning the sea into an inescapable trap. Their nightmare truly begins when the fleet makes landfall on the dark shores of the Cyclopes. Trapped inside a massive cavern by Polyphemus, who is this giant, man-eating, one-eyed monster, Odysseus has to watch in absolute horror as his men are brutally devoured. He knows a sword isn't going to save them here, so he deconstructs the problem and executes just a brilliant tactical escape. Step 1. He tricks the beast into drinking strong, undiluted wine until it passes out. Step 2. He and his men sharpen a massive wooden stake, heat it up in the cavern's fire, and drive it right into the monster's single eye. Step 3. To evade the blinded giant's grasping hands, they silently cling to the undersides of the giant's enormous sheep, literally riding them right out the cave doors to freedom. It was a completely flawless escape. But as his ships successfully launched back into the surf, that poison of arrogance flared right back up. Overcome by hubris, that fatal pride that so often leads to a king's downfall, Odysseus makes a catastrophic mistake. He just couldn't stand being anonymous. He shouted his real name back to the shore. He wanted the glory. He wanted the monster to know exactly who had bested him. It's a timeless leadership lesson, really. Victory often breeds a toxic arrogance that can destroy everything you've just fought for. The blinded, weeping giant immediately called upon his father to curse this Greek king. And guess who his father was? Poseidon. The sea god answered the prayer, vowing that Odysseus would lose every single man, face total destruction, and find absolutely nothing but chaos if he ever even managed to reach home. Part 2. The Nightmare Voyage, the Great Twist. So the sea god's curse absolutely grabs the fleet by the throat, and the voyage descends into a literal nightmare. Yet they get this one tiny glimmer of hope. On a floating island, the master of the winds takes pity on the wandering king. He captures every chaotic storm wind in the world and seals them tightly inside a heavy leather bag, leaving out only a gentle western breeze to point them home. Look at this rapid descent on the timeline. For 9 full days, smooth sailing. It was perfect. They were so close they could literally see the smoke rising from the cooking fires of their homeland. But then comes that one tragic moment. While Odysseus finally sleeps from just sheer exhaustion, his deeply suspicious crew, who are totally convinced this heavy leather bag contains hoarded gold and silver, they slice it open. In an instant, the violent hurricane winds explode outward, violently yanking the fleet all the way back into uncharted waters. And from there, it's pure survival mode. In a single afternoon, they land among giant cannibals who hurl massive boulders from the cliffs, instantly smashing 11 of the 12 ships. Hundreds of men die in minutes. With just his one remaining ship, Odysseus is forced to sail to the literal edge of the world, straight into the dark terror of the underworld itself. In the shadowed realm of Hades, the blind prophet Tiresias delivers some pretty dark, terrifying warnings of what lies ahead on the water.
Surviving these next trials is going to require absolute discipline and strict instructions. To pass the Sirens, which are these deadly creatures whose enchanting voices literally lure sailors to crash their ships right into jagged rocks, Odysseus has to stuff his crew's ears entirely with beeswax. But Odysseus, being ever curious, really wants to hear the song, so he orders his deafened men to tightly bind him to the ship's massive wooden mast, explicitly forbidding them to untie him no matter how fiercely he begs and screams as the maddening, beautiful song fills his ears. So the crucial point here is the impossible leadership choices Odysseus is forced to make. After surviving the Sirens, they have to navigate an impossibly narrow strait, guarded by two legendary horrors. On one side is Scylla, a horrific six-headed beast that strikes from the cliffs to snatch living sailors straight off the deck. And on the exact opposite side of that same narrow strait lies Charybdis, a massive swirling whirlpool capable of swallowing their entire final ship completely whole. It's a lose-lose scenario. Odysseus makes the calculated, heartbreaking choice to hug the cliffs. He actively chooses to sail close to Scylla, forced to listen to the agonizing screams of 6 of his best men as they're ripped into the air and devoured by the beast's jaws. It is a terrifying sacrifice, but he makes it solely to prevent the total annihilation of the rest of his crew in the watery abyss of Charybdis.
Part 3. Divine Wrath, the ultimate test.
But sadly, all that sacrifice is put to the ultimate test on Thrinacia, the sacred island of the sun god Helios. You see, the prophet Tiresias had given Odysseus one absolute, unbreakable command for his crew. Whatever you do not touch the sacred cattle of the sun god. Well, driven to absolute starvation by month-long headwinds that trap them on the island, the desperate men disobey those strict orders while Odysseus has withdrawn to prey. They slaughtered the sun god's sacred golden beasts for food, and the devastating consequence comes the exact moment they finally set sail. The sky darkens. Zeus hurls a massive blinding bolt of lightning directly into their last surviving ship. It shatters into 1,000 pieces, throwing the remaining crew into the crushing depths of the ocean. Out of the hundreds of fierce warriors who left Troy all those years ago, only Odysseus survives. Clinging to a broken piece of wood for days, he finally washes ashore on the isolated island of the nymph Calypso. There, without an army, without a ship, he is imprisoned as her captive lover for 7 long, silent years.
Part 4. The Bloody Return, Reclaiming the Throne. But this epic doesn't end on a lonely beach. No, it ends with a tense, hidden, and deeply violent struggle right inside his own home. After 7 years captive on Calypso's island, Odysseus finally returns to the rocky shores of Ithaca entirely alone. To protect him from immediate assassination, the goddess Athena magically disguises the great king as a filthy, broken beggar. He walks into his kingdom only to find his palace completely overrun by over 100 arrogant, violent noblemen terrorizing his loyal wife, Penelope. Desperate to stall these dangerous men who are constantly demanding she remarry, she announces a seemingly impossible challenge from the shadows. She declares she will only marry the man who can string Odysseus's massive, ancient hunting bow and shoot an arrow perfectly through the small rings of 12 iron axe heads lined up in a row. It is a brilliant stalling tactic. One by one, the wealthy, arrogant suitors step up. They strain, they sweat, they curse, but they fail to even bend the heavy, unforgiving wood of the great king's bow. Let's see how this builds, because after every single wealthy, powerful nobleman in the room fails the challenge, the great hall goes dead quiet. Out of the shadows, one single, filthy old beggar steps forward. The suitors immediately erupt into cruel laughter, just mocking the old man for even daring to touch the royal weapon. But the laughter abruptly dies. In a single fluid motion, Odysseus strings the ancient bow perfectly. He calmly draws back the string and pwhack! The arrow flies true, piercing perfectly through all 12 iron axes. Instantly, Athena strips away the magical disguise, revealing the hardened, legendary king of Ithaca in all his terrifying glory. Standing in the main doorway with his grown son Telemachus at his side, Odysseus locks the heavy doors of the great hall. There is absolutely no escape. He draws another arrow, and the systematic, pulse-pounding slaughter begins. Odysseus and Telemachus execute every single suitor in the room, the blood pooling on the floors of his home as he finally reclaims his throne, his family, and his kingdom after 20 long years in the dark. As we close this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought. Think of the smoke of Troy. Think of the monsters, the divine wrath, and the sheer volume of blood spilled on the polished floors of his own home. He won back his kingdom, yes, But looking at the bodies of over 100 men executed in that hall, was this bloody slaughter true justice, or was it the final horrific tragedy of a man forever broken and changed by 20 years of unyielding war and survival? I'll let you decide.